you start to realize that it's the combination of all of these different functions that needs to be there in order for your body's handling of nutrient loads to be done in the most kind of effective way possible.
What the heck is GLP-1?
Yes, GLP-1, it's all the craze now, right? It's an incretin hormone. So that's a fancy way of saying it's a gut hormone that helps your body deal with the nutrient load that your body, takes in. And one of the primary ways it does that is it promotes insulin secretion. So this is super important because then it enables your body to get rid of the sugar from the bloodstream and move it to where it's needed, which is to power up your cells.
And so this is something, this hormone is something that we would normally produce and should normally produce. And we now know that this hormone, among other things, is used for weight loss. It was not the original intention of synthesizing this hormone. And I live in the LA area, and I think every human being seems to be on this drug for mostly bad reasons. But vanity would be the number one. A lot of people who use this drug notice that one of the major side effects is they are not hungry, period. And sometimes they are so not hungry they walk around nauseated, and that apparently is a good thing. So why is what we produce maybe better than these pharmacologic solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just, separate entirely, right? Like a pharmacological solution, you should use it if you've got pharmacological reasons, for that. So definitely kind of using it outside of that is not really a good idea because the levels of concentrations and so on that those are intended for are just a different scale. And what we're talking about here, kind of your body's natural production of it, it's more about getting your system more into natural balance and having your system's appropriate response when you eat a meal. So it's more akin to, the benefits of having a well-balanced meal with the right nutrients, right? There's that aspect of it is kind of well understood by people, but the microbiome aspect is kind of works hand in hand. So you can have the well-balanced, nutritious meal, but if your microbiome isn't predisposed to handle it appropriately, you're not going to be optimal on that front. You're not going to be balanced. But yeah, GLP-1, the natural levels of it, it helps, as I said, on insulin secretion, but also, to your point, on satiety. So, for the natural levels, it just will help you get comfortable more quickly, and so you don't, ingest more than you need, right? And another area that it helps with is actually on slowing down gastric emptying. And what that means is that as opposed to having all of the contents of your stomach kind of, dumped into the rest of your system all in one shot, which results in these high spikes, it does it in a more metered way. And so if all of that is working as intended, then your meals will not be kind of this rocky affair, kind of roller coaster. It will end up being much more, much smoother, resulting in kind of better energy and not having the lows or the highs.
So we've talked about Akkermansia a lot and how that particular bug is, to me, it's always been the holy grail. It's one of the, I think, the cornerstone species of health. And I've been, fascinated with it and butyrate production and promoting butyrate-producing species. How is this different? Are they tied together, or you got to have both? Why did you guys say, hey, GLP-1 is something else we should be looking at?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And this actually, ties, I think, with what the theme for our discussion today, which is the way that these systems work together, right? So GLP-1 is the signaling done by your cells. But then, Akkermansia and these butyrate producers, as we talked about, last time, as your listeners probably know about, they produce these very helpful postbiotics, things like these short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. But we'll talk about other things as well. And what they do is that they help your cells function better. So butyrate, for example, is an energy source for the cells in your gut lining. And then they in turn signal your cells to do their signaling. So the two systems kind of work hand in hand. So it's not kind of one or the other, but rather the two things together lead to the optimal outcomes.
Again, the advertisements have been aimed at diabetics. A lot of these pharmaceutical drugs were aimed at diabetics, and the side effects were noted. Our listeners who are not a diabetic or who aren't pre-diabetic, why would that be of interest to you and me to, have better insulin control, have less cravings, etc.?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so this is why it's important to think about this kind of more as the natural system and how it's intended. Every meal can end up being, kind of a much sharper, almost joyride versus a smoother transition, right? And if your meals are well balanced and if your microbiome is tuned up, then you'll kind of avoid, my analogy is you don't want to be on, kind of the jolting seesaw, right? Where you crash at the bottom and you come up off your seat at the top. You want things to be this time and range is something that people talk about, especially those who use continuous glucose monitors and things like that. So you don't want to be very often either too low or too high, but in the band as often as possible. And if you do that, that helps your overall health. Basically, shocks to the system are just not good overall, and they don't put you in a good space.
Where's the research now on Akkermansia, for example, in facilitating this?
Yeah, so that's been one of the areas that was really interesting. A couple years ago, there was this paper that came out in Nature Microbiology from a Korean lab that delved into Akkermansia's role with the signaling with your body's GLP-1. So they had a preclinical model, and they showed that in that model, Akkermansia was protective of minimizing weight gain and reducing these sugar spikes. And they delved in even more than that and actually showed that there's a specific protein that viable metabolically active Akkermansia produces, and they termed it P9, and that this P9 in turn interacted with these specialized cells in your gut, these L cells, and induced them to produce GLP-1. These cells are the ones that are the gatekeepers for GLP-1 production. And so that was very exciting. And we here at Pendulum reproduced, their in vitro model and demonstrated that in this model of L cells that when we put in the Akkermansia postbiotics from our strain under manufacturing conditions, we were also able to replicate that. So that was super exciting. So I think there is a direct link now with Akkermansia on helping to maintain kind of your healthy response to food intake.
We talked about before, you have a product called Glucose Control that combines multiple strains, including Akkermansia and butyrate. And you had shown in a clinical study that this had actually lowered hemoglobin A1C. Have there been have people measured in a clinical study, not a preclinical study, GLP-1 levels in humans on Akkermansia? Or are you doing that?
That's something that's, definitely in the works. Because obviously that's sort of the holy grail. It's one thing to have things in in vitro model or even in a preclinical animal model, but it's obviously a different thing to be able to see it directly in people. One of the ways that you can get at it is through, measuring, as we said, kind of with CGM, response to sugar spike. So that's further down the line, it doesn't give you directly to the GLP-1, like how was it done, but it's helpful at least to tell us kind of where to dig. But that's definitely something we want to follow up with.
All right, so now you got everybody interested. Oh, gee, I want more GLP-1. Let's talk about, are there other ways to increase our GLP-1?
Yeah, so it turns out there is another approach, which turned out from that, as we dug into our clinical study and looked at kind of all of the postbiotic stuff that was produced there that could be helpful, we realized that there was this secondary bile acid, UDCA, ursodeoxycholic acid, that was higher in the group that responded the most metabolically. So the ones that had the drop in A1C and the lower sugar spikes. And this was very interesting. We hadn't considered that angle, that kind of bile acid approach. But then we looked into the literature, and it turns out that, in fact, 10 years ago, people had been seeing the effects of UDCA, and there they did measure in humans the increase in GLP-1 upon taking UDCA, as well as, of course, the overall metabolic benefits.
Interestingly enough, I've been recommending TUDCA, which to a lot of my patients, based on Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine believed, and they were obviously right, that bear bile was a real health tonic. And interestingly, bears to this day in Japan and China are hunted for their gallbladder. And they care less about the rest of the bear, but they want the bear bile and the gallbladder, and it gets large amounts of money. And you go, where the heck did that come from? And it turns out UDCA, urso, is bear. And this is where all this came from. So I think it's amazing that all of this stuff that's been known for thousands of years, actually we can now put a clinical measurement on and go, oh, that's how that works.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think this has been the exciting area of the microbiome, explaining a number of things that we hadn't understood before, and then revealing, new paths for us. And the bile acid side of it is, yet again, this kind of two systems working together, right? You create the primary bile acid, but it's your microbiome that creates the secondary version. So again, if you have one and not the other, you're not going to be in the spot that you need to be.
My new book will be coming out in January called Gut Check. And a lot of the purpose of the book, in one of the chapters, is it takes two. And, the part that the microbiome plays, as you know and I know, we're every day we learn some, important interaction that we would have never imagined was as complex an ecosystem that none of us would have guessed except for the Microbiome Project. And but the Chinese knew 2 centuries ago. So there's a study right out of UCLA looking at UDCA's role in metabolic syndrome in elderly patients, right?
Yeah, so I believe you're referring to the one where there was about 90 geriatric patients that were being studied.
Yeah. That one.
Yeah. And they were studying it for liver disease, so non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it had been known for a bit of time that UDCA helps on that front. And so they were measuring liver enzymes and using ultrasound, and they did find that, in fact, UDCA helped on that front. But then they were, pleasantly surprised to find out that it also helped on glycemic control and insulin sensitivity. So that, kind of started people thinking that UDCA might have, more than just liver health benefits. And in fact, maybe I'll even mention, because there was in that same year, there was a much smaller kind of pilot study of about 7 people that was in healthy volunteers. And this is the one that I was referring to earlier, that where they gave UDCA and then they measured GLP-1 to show that, in fact, one of the ways that it was working is by increasing GLP-1 levels. And that in conjunction, it also resulted in lower glucose spikes. So it was a small study, but it was sort of like got to the mechanism.
Now, let me back up for people who don't know. We have an epidemic of fatty liver disease in this country. We sometimes call it NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or FLA, fatty liver disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And there's also a beautiful study that I've referenced. You can give fructose to rats and give them fatty liver disease really easily, folks. And there's also a study that shows that reverses that fatty liver disease in rats, right?
That's right. That's right. And actually, it's in some senses quite similar to that study I was referred to with Akkermansia that was done, that preclinical study. So, right, they induced this metabolic syndrome in the rats through giving them fructose, and then with UDCA showed that it helped with insulin resistance and reduced oxidative stress.
And it also dropped uric acid.
That's right. So, I mean, I think you're seeing kind of a lot of these benefits from these postbiotics. And it's sort of, you start to realize that it's the combination of all of these different functions that needs to be there in order for your body's handling of nutrient loads to be done in the most kind of effective way possible.
I'm going to pause there for a second because you and I throw around the word postbiotic like, cocktail party discussion. If you've read my books, you know what postbiotics are, but if you're just joining us, it's confusing. Most people now know probiotics, so-called friendly bacteria, and Akkermansia is a probiotic. Then people are beginning to understand prebiotics, which most people categorize as fiber, but if you listen to me and even Pendulum, you know that one of the exciting findings is polyphenols are actually prebiotics that our gut microbiome just thinks is delicious. So what? Well, your probiotics eat the prebiotics, and they then produce postbiotics, which are the active compounds that simplistically comes from the digestion of prebiotics by probiotics. Sorry to be so confusing. I think if we had to do it all over again, we would have never used these terms, but we're stuck with them. So postbiotics are where the action gets done. And for instance, short-chain fatty acids are postbiotics. Gasotransmitters, when you fart, believe it or not, those are postbiotic signaling molecules. Sorry to do that, but we can go down Nerdville, but we got to keep everybody. So postbiotics are really important.
Absolutely, yeah, no, and definitely the definitions are super important, and otherwise everybody gets lost in the woods. Yeah, exactly right. Postbiotics are really important, and as you're pointing out, it's about kind of building the right ecosystem, right? So the prebiotics, it kind of gets the right substrates, gets the right nutrients there, builds, gives you the right kind of plants that you want, right? The probiotics, and then they give you the fruits and vegetables that are helpful for your body, that are actually the business end, as I like to say, that kind of moves the needle on your health.
All right. So what does all this mean for our listeners? How do they get their UDCA levels up and get their GLP-1 levels up?
Yeah, so actually one of our best-selling products, Metabolic Daily, has all of these key strains. So it's a formulation that consists of 5 strains. It includes Akkermansia, but it also includes 3 butyrate producers. And then it rounds it out with a bifido that helps kind of break down a number of these complex substrates. So it's got kind of the full gamut that's able to tackle the problem from a number of different angles. So it's intended to help with this, natural balancing for metabolic effectiveness.
And folks, I take Metabolic Daily. I'm not afraid to tell you that. Again, in Gut Check, one of the things that I think is really important for us all to realize is you have to have, it's almost like an assembly line. And one bacteria species has to be able to make a byproduct of its eating something that a second bacteria species needs to complete its job. And in fact, there is a chain of bacteria species. And we may have, well, we now know that there is bacteria that are 5 chains down the line. And if you don't have the first 4 bacteria, that guy can't produce the postbiotic that we really want. So it's people like Pendulum who have said, okay, Akkermansia is great. It's really important. It's a keystone species. But it's a facilitator because it's giving these other guys the things that you really want, like butyrate. And believe me, butyrate is, you really want it. So I think this is great. And I congratulate you guys for, combining these in what is good science. You just didn't dump, here's 20 different strains and there's a lot of them and we have no idea what they do, but here they are and you should swallow them.
No, exactly. I mean, it was in some senses kind of following in the footsteps of what normally would be kind of the development of a pharma thing, where you think through the functions that you really need. What are those key ingredients, and put those all together and test it all the way through. But yeah, no, to your point, it's important that you think about it in that ecosystem way in general, because otherwise it's hard sometimes to get some of these results that require, a number of things to be layered in at the same time.
There's a lot of talk, even in research circles, and I write about this in the new book. Dead bacteria do tell tales. Dead bacteria have utility. On the other hand, live bacteria have potentially and probably more utility. And can you help us through that? Why don't I just take a bunch of dead stuff? There are some papers that suggest that dead bacteria do some pretty cool things. And I think they do. And you probably do too. But why living? Why did you guys work so hard to get living bacteria?
Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, I think that there is science around some of the things that are, for example, just directly in the cell walls of the strains that can be helpful. And in some senses, because of the ease of it, it can be, maybe you can pack more in. But you miss some of the what's produced that actually requires it to be metabolically active. So the reason why we kind of went down the much harder road is that we understood that there's going to be a whole slew of things that these strains needed to produce on the spot. And that part of the magic, if you will, is that they're in the right place, responding to the environment and producing things in the right ratios. And that's crucial, right? And I think we talked about it a little bit the last time that, some people even say like, well, why don't you just give butyrate? If you know that butyrate is good, just give butyrate. And it's not that simple, because butyrate is just not going to make it to the right spot, right? It's sort of throwing cash on the highway. Like everything can use it, and it's not going to be in the spot that it needs to do the signaling and that's needed. So it's along those lines. One of the analogies I always use is like, the strain is like a really smart robot, right? That is in the right spot and interacting appropriately and responding to the environment. And that's very difficult to replicate by just kind of launching something over the fence and just hoping it happens to land in the right spot at the right concentration and does the right thing. And then there's just the general ecosystem argument. So beyond what the strains themselves produce, they kind of create the environment, as you're pointing out, for other strains that you want to grow to kind of flourish as well. So it's sort of like you create a nice, lovely garden, and then suddenly you have hummingbirds. Like, you wouldn't that wouldn't have happened if you only kind of had like one or two ingredients out there. You need kind of the full system to be there to get some of the broader benefits.
Again, we've talked about Akkermansia and your other products. Why would you go for metabolic daily versus one of your Akkermansia products? Does somebody need both? Is one better for somebody? Why'd you come up with this product?
Yeah. It's a great question, and one that we get all the time. So as we touched on, Metabolic Daily has a broader set of strains. So it really tackles the metabolic question from a number of angles, right? So it's got the butyrate producers, it's got butyricum that produces that bare bile that we just talked about, and it has Akkermansia as well. So it produces the P9 and is a keystone strain. So kind of in conjunction, all of them work together really well for metabolic related issues and kind of keeping you on that time and range type of thing balanced. Akkermansia, on the other hand, is very concentrated on Akkermansia. So it's for those that want to really, supercharge and replenish that keystone strain. And it is an important strain. So it is one of the ones that helps on a number of fronts, but specifically for gut health, right? It helps with the lining, right? It's one of the few strains that's allowed by your body to be directly in the lining. And studies have shown that it helps increase the thickness of that and helps kind of the barrier integrity of your gut. So if that's what you're shooting for, then I would go for Akkermansia directly.
I guess you just answered my question. If you can only afford one, you got a preference?
As I said, like it depends on what you're going for. I mean, I myself go for the broader set because I feel like I'm in good shape now on Akkermansia, and I just need kind of a maintenance dose of it, and I need some of the other strains to kind of round it out.
Since you brought that up, I get that question all the time. Okay, I took Akkermansia for 3 months every day, and I bet you I got plenty down there, and why should I even bother taking any more? I have seeded my gut. What say you?
That's a really great question. And we actually studied this directly. So in our clinical study, we had a washout period, right, where we stopped giving any of the strains for a month. So the intervention period was 3 months daily, and then a washout of a month. And it turned out that only 1 in 5 or less had any strain remaining after the 1 month. Now, it's important to note that we did not give any advice to change diet or to change your habit, because this was part of the study. It was like to see the effect of the formulation. But this is the sort of thing that has to be done kind of in concert. So if you want engraftment and these strains to take, it is an ecosystem type of question, and you may need to always give a little bit of dosing in there for a while to support it, right? Or to combine it with supporting it with some of these prebiotics and the right kind of nutrition balance.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there aren't any foods that contain Akkermansia.
Yeah, not in any sort of significant quantity. So, in fact, generally, as you pointed out, it's polyphenols that people have used to help, basically to help flourish the remnants of Akkermansia that you might have.
And if people have read my books and even in the upcoming book, super old people who are thriving have a much more generous population of Akkermansia and than, quote, most people. And that's, I think, one of the reasons we probably ought to be interested in having Akkermansia around. There was a very distinguished colleague of mine who recently had a video out about all the foods where you can get Akkermansia, and I just actually cringed because there aren't any. Sorry about that, but that's okay. Are there any other probiotic strains, friendly bacteria, that support the production of GLP-1 that you guys are looking at?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why we got into butyrate producers were that they were correlated with its sort of general metabolic health, and it was thought that maybe they could themselves, induce GLP-1. That part, I think, is still a little bit up for debate as to whether they do it directly, because it may be that they do it indirectly through kind of synergy with strains like Akkermansia, because Akkermansia and butyrate producers actually work kind of in concert, exchanging molecules and so on. And then there's, as we said, like maybe subsets of butyrate producers like butyricum that have this other quality, like the secondary bile acid. So they may have fallen under the umbrella of, well, butyrate producers help on this front, but it may be kind of a more specialized subset of those. So we're on the lookout for other ones. Right now, it's mainly the UDCA route and Akkermansia.
Yeah, you guys are always doing something interesting. So you're about to launch an omega-3 booster.
Mm-hmm.
How do you boost omega-3? Can you fill us in?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually, it follows in the footsteps of the success of the polyphenol booster. And so where polyphenols have been shown to help boost Akkermansia levels, omega-3 has been shown to boost levels of butyrate producers. So kind of both of those boosters would work in concert with our strain products, right? And you can kind of bring them in together, or maybe as a initiating it, or afterwards, right? So you can do kind of different combinations, and they can help kind of work together with the strains.
I think this is very important for people to understand, and I use the example in my Palm Springs office about probiotics, and I call them basically grass seed. And I say, okay, I'm going to sell you some grass seed. And you come back 2 months later and you say, you sold me bad grass seed. And I said, why? They said, well, what'd you do with it? Well, I took it out in the desert and put it in the sand. And I said, yeah, and did you water it? No, you didn't tell me to. Did you fertilize it? No, you didn't tell me to. And I go, well, wait a minute, what did you expect? And I think, you guys and me and lots of people are beginning to realize that, yeah, it's great to swallow some grass seed, probiotics, but you got to give them what they want to eat, and you got to fertilize them, or they're not going to grow. Is that just a naive way to explain that?
No, that's a perfect way to explain it. I mean, I think that's exactly right, and I think that's such a great analogy, because I think it will hit home with people, and they realize, like, oh, it's not enough to just take these strains out of context. You've got to also water them. You've got to take care of them. You've got to bring other things along for the ride. Bring their friends along for the ride as well. So other strains that kind of work in concert with them, as well as these prebiotics, are super crucial.
Yeah, and your omega-3 point is actually very well taken, because there's plenty of literature that shows omega-3 fats enhance the integrity of the gut wall.
Yes.
There's beautiful literature on short-chain omega-3 fat, alpha-linolenic acid, and actually preventing lipopolysaccharide incursion across the gut wall. And yet, what we're probably going to find out is, well, these guys weren't doing it themselves. It was facilitating these species of gut bacteria, which are then, making more mucus or making butyrate. And it wasn't the omega-3 that was the actual thing. It was what these bacteria needed from them to do their job.
I think that's exactly right. It's basically this overall network, and a good deal of the benefits come about from these indirect effects, where they help to grow the right set of strains that can do these functions and can interact then with your cells in the right way.
We've talked a lot about GLP-1, and it is obviously a hot topic. Are you developing, with what you know now, a GLP-1 product, or
Yes, I mean that is definitely something that we're looking into, and just like in the discussion we just had, you wouldn't be surprised that it will contain Akkermansia, and it will contain butyricum for the bear bile, and it's also going to contain inulin, right? So the fiber, as well as rounding it out with a bifido. Again, to your point of that assembly line, which I really like that analogy. And so actually, I'd want to like reach out to your listeners and say, for those of you who may be interested, to please reach out to us at pendulumlife.com, because we're thinking of, having a study to see its effects on cravings and other outcomes as one of the ways to learn more about it.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. All right. You heard it here first. I have a whole section in my new book about the effect on emotions from the microbiome, and specifically depression and anxiety. Can you give us your thoughts on where are we with the microbiome gut-brain connection, particularly in terms of depression?
Yeah, no, it's actually, I think, one of the most exciting fields in the microbiome, right? The gut-brain connection. And, I think it's still early days, so I think there's still a lot to be done there. But now I think there isn't any doubt. I mean, a few years ago, it might have been considered a little crazy to say that, the connection goes two ways, right? And that your gut is able to actually influence your mood, and it can have an effect on anxiety and depression. But now it's widely accepted, and in fact, the question now is really understanding the mechanisms and understanding how to harness that knowledge and create interventions and things that can help on that front. So I think it's a very exciting moment for this specific field in the microbiome.
Yeah, I mean, it's even got it's got an entire term now, psychobiotics, and I mean, there's divisions devoted to this now. I wish they hadn't chosen psychobiotic because it sounds kind of psycho, but I think we're stuck with that term now too. So, and it doesn't mean psychedelics either, but. But no, I think, Daniel Amen was now, basically said, I think we should really stop talking about mental health as a brain issue. And we really ought to be, talking that, about gut health and its deep connection to what our psyche is doing.
No, absolutely. And, out of fear of getting, too philosophical, but, as I've gotten more and more into this field, you really do recognize what you said, which is the centrality of the gut. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, because for an organism, the key thing is energy conversion, right? Life is converting energy into being able to do all of the kind of life activities. So it has to be kind of the thing, in some sense, running the show. Like, if things go wrong there isn't anything else that's going to happen. So interestingly, the brain and such is maybe an accessory organ.
I've for years now called this thing up here the second brain, and the real brain is down here. And, I've written about it. I think because of the incredible the genome of the microbiome, vastly more genes in our microbiome than we have, and they're constantly mutating, they're constantly changing, they're constantly getting new information from viruses, and they're doing this constantly. And so I think we basically uploaded most of our processing power to this supercomputer that happens to live in our gut, and that supercomputer, sorry folks, kind of controls everything that's going to happen to you. Sorry, but Hippocrates knew this 2,500 years ago.
That's right. That's right.
He knew it.
A great quote.
All disease begins in the gut. He called it a green life force energy that wanted people to have perfect health. And he didn't know what that was, but I think, makes your work and others, we're beginning to realize that this green life force energy, maybe we should have called it brown life force energy. But yeah, it's this most important, tropical rainforest organism, whatever we want to call it, that is this life force energy.
No, absolutely. And actually, I mean, I actually find it beautiful that the description, of us is really this super organism, right? We're not just the collection of human cells. That's almost boring to think about. It's really this interaction, this deep interaction with all these other species that are all working in concert. And it's an amazing network. And it's a complex thing that we're only now starting to, piece little bits and pieces. And as we do it, I think we're beginning to realize, a lot of benefits, because not accounting for that was, keeping us in the dark on some really crucial functions.
Yeah, really, up until 2006, we didn't even know these guys existed. And the sequencing, it's getting better and better. We're getting, deeper and deeper into the sequences from groups and species and families, and yeah.
No, that's exactly right. Because it was the advent of sequencing and the availability of it that enabled us to see this kind of hidden universe. Because otherwise, we were only left with the things that we could culture.
Right, which wasn't ever very good.
Yeah. Because it's a little bit of a catch-22. Like, how do you know what the conditions are to culture something that you've never seen? Right? You have no idea what substrates it might need, what conditions it would be. And I liken it to kind of deep sea travel. Like, the type of organisms that live in that environment are just very different than anything that you see everywhere else. So,
the next episode of the Dr. Gundry podcast is waiting for you now. Interestingly enough, people who have some of the longest life expectancy, the Acciarolis in southern Italy, are small fish eaters, anchovy eaters.